Welcome to Cambridge, where the weather has just, and now it's midsummer, has actually just finally warmed up. This beautiful orchid is Dendrobium aphyllum, and I have, quite a reasonable range of orchids, and luckily, every now and again you just strike on a particular orchid that seems to really thrive and does well for you. Not all of them, but some of them, and they become your sort of favourite sort of mainstays that flower regularly every year at a particular time of year and produce a marvellous display, and this is certainly one of them. It's an easy orchid to grow, and it comes from a very wide range of Southeast Asia, and from an altitude of 150 right up to 1800 metres, so it covers a very big temperature range. Which is one of the things I think that helps make it quite easy to grow. Some people say it's fragrant. It has a very faint fragrance, but I don't think you'd really grow it for that reason. It has a pendulous habit. In here it is grown in intermediate conditions, which means it's sort of minimum of about 14 centigrade in the winter, and then in the summer, in the 20s hopefully, well just recently but not until recently. The canes start to grow up and then arch down as they age, and what I'm trying to do is to encourage them all to sort of bend over, and I have it hanging up so that it encourages them towards the light so that they bend over and all cascade down in one particular direction. Early on, I tended to sort of swivel it round to try and get it to grow evenly all the way round when the canes weren't quite so long. But now it's become much bigger. I'm trying to get them to all cascade down in one direction, because otherwise it's impossible to sort of find somewhere to put it. The one disadvantage of this particular Dendrobium is that the canes flower on the one-year-old canes. So this one will flower next year. This is a cane that flowered the previous year or maybe the year before. They will only flower once on each cane the year after that they grew, which is a shame. But you have to leave the old leafless and flowerless canes on because they take quite a few more years to actually die off and can be removed. Interestingly, a lot of people say that you should withhold the water, and then in the autumn when the new canes have grown, they drop their leaves and it remains leafless for a long period. In my case, whether it should do or not, I tend to keep it on the dry side over the winter, but I have found that the new growths carry on growing right the way through for a much longer period, and it's not until just before, in the spring, just before the buds start forming on the previous year's canes, that all the leaves start dropping off. And that's how mine behaves. And I have spoken to other people where it's the same, but it's not what you would expect from reading on the internet and reading in the books. The other Dendrobium that I've got that is also done very well for me, and is similar in habit, is this one. I'll just pop this back up here. You can see I have it hanging up because that's the only way I can accommodate it. And this is Dendrobium lawesii, which also has a similar habit and perhaps produces even longer canes. The big advantage of this species is that the canes, once they have lost their leaves and become leafless, they will keep flowering more than once a year and for many years in succession. And whereas Dendrobium aphyllum, the flowers are quite short-lived, this looks absolutely magnificent for about 10 days. Dendrobium lawesii, the flowers are very long-lasting, and this will now be looking really attractive for probably a couple of months, and then later, towards the end of the summer, early autumn, probably get another flush of leaves. Yes, what I wanted, this comes from about 800 to 2,000 metres, so I have it growing similar to this one, intermediate. It covers quite a wide temperature range, from covering quite a wide range of altitudes, and it does very well in here for me. Again, I don't withhold water completely in the winter, but it does get much more of a drying out between waterings, and because this is growing mounted, the bark is sprayed every morning at this time of the year, and then in the winter a light misting just to keep it well supplied with moisture. As you might expect, because the flowers are tubular, they are bird pollinated. I originally thought hummingbird pollinated, but bearing in mind that this comes from Asia and hummingbirds are from South America, not hummingbirds, but instead they are bird pollinated by sunbirds, which I believe, I've never seen them in the wild. They can actually hover and stick their tongue in to get the nectar. They also come in a huge range of colours. This one happens to be a fairly sort of attractive but not particularly brightly coloured pink, but you can get them in orange and bicoloured forms with white. Very beautiful. Now, the most powerful scent that is apparent in the greenhouse at the moment, especially on lovely, beautiful, sunny, warm mornings like this. This is Phalaenopsis corningiana, which has these beautiful, very strongly scented flowers. Now, what does it smell of? I would say it has a sort of, I can only describe it as a sort of soapy scent. It's not a beautifully sweet sort of perfume, but it's a strong scent that I think most people would say is attractive. I ought to ask some other people, but anyway, it is certainly very strongly scented, and if you get a chance to smell it, I would recommend that you grow it. Most of my Phalaenopsis spend 6 months of the year not at all happy because it's not warm enough in here. But for 6 months of the year, like now, you can see it's growing a beautiful new leaf. The old flower spike that has produced flowers for several years has just produced 2 lovely new ones. If I show you carefully, you can just see a few specks on these flowers, and that is because I have had problems with thrips. And I think I've got on top of it by introducing biological controls. And just recently I've just seen 1 or 2 adult thrips. So it takes a while for these biological controls to work, but I think I've got on top of it. What was particularly unfortunate is that my lovely Neophanesia falcata, now called Vanda falcata, was really badly affected. It looks quite unhappy at the moment because it not only destroyed all the flowers this year, and I normally expect a beautiful display of flowers on this, but it also started attacking the roots and put them off their growth. But I'm hoping now, as I say, by introducing the predatory mites, I've got on top of that without using chemicals, and things will improve from now on. Coming back to the Phalaenopsis corningiana, I wanted to show you this, and I'm sorry I'm rather late to show you. This is, and I'll just put this one down, this is Phalaenopsis hongenensis, which I've only had for about 18 months. It is a beautiful species, Phalaenopsis, and incredibly it comes from really quite high altitudes, up to about 2,000 metres. So it's classified as cool or even cold growing, which is a huge advantage for me because, as I said, most of my Phalaenopsis really don't like it in here for a lot of the year. I'm sorry I'm late in filming this because the flowers are really beautiful, and what was interesting is that it produced 2 flower spikes, and I thought, oh good. When they came into bloom, I could see that what had actually happened was I actually had 2 plants At the seedling stage, back in the nursery, probably way back in Asia somewhere, 2 seedlings have been mounted on the same plastic plaque. And I've ended up with 2 forms of the same species. This one has nearly finished, but you can just about see it's a much pinker and redder form, whereas this one has these beautiful green flowers, and I'll show you some close-ups. And I'm showing you this now because it makes a perfect pair with the corningiana. This also has a very interesting, not such a strong, but a strong scent, sort of clean, another sort of clean, interesting, not a beautiful sweet perfume, but a very interesting, very worthwhile scent. So I'm absolutely chuffed with this new addition to my collection of species, particularly because it is going to be more tolerant of temperature for me. You can see I've got this on a piece of cork, and last year started producing really nice root growth. They do apparently have very extensive root systems and relatively little foliage, which I have read is deciduous, so maybe at the very high altitudes the leaves will fall off for the winter. But in my case, it retained its leaves all through the winter. One has to ask the question, why on earth Phalaenopsis hybridizers producing Phalaenopsis for supermarkets can't introduce some of the genes from some of the beautifully and interestingly scented Phalaenopsis into those that you find in supermarkets and garden centres. Now, in the past, I've been tempted, especially in the summer, to purchase quite a few of the warmer growing Phalaenopsis, which I've mentioned in the past. This is a good example. This is Phalaenopsis violacea blue, which has these beautiful, and I love the subtle sort of colouring of this one. You can hardly smell it in here at the moment because it's overpowered by some of the other things, but has a much sort of sweeter, more sort of rose-like perfume on a good day. But this is what tends to happen. I look enviously at people who have videos of their Phalaenopsis that have been grown indoors or in warmer climates. Beautiful foliage, beautiful flowers, and none of this sort of spotting and sort of blotchiness that I tend to get occurring over the winter, no matter how hard I try to keep water off the foliage. It grows quite well, it's got good root growth, but because for 6 months of the year it's just not happy. You might be interested to see this is actually growing on a tube of cork, and it actually sits in a little plastic tray, so you can see the roots are all sort of flattened off at the bottom, and after watering, after spraying, a little bit of water sort of rests in the bottom there, so that they can retain a bit more moisture. And then all these other roots, particularly in the winter, are allowed to dry out thoroughly by the end of the day. I'm not sure whether it's a good idea or not, but as you see, I've got 3 different Phalaenopsis on here because it saves a bit of space, but they do grow at different rates, and I tend now to plant just one species on each particular bark, so they don't have this sort of competition and sort of crowding out effect. Also, if the one above, if you get a leaf just sort of resting on the one below, you tend to get water sort of by capillary action collecting between the leaves, which even in the summer, if the weather has turned miserable, can cause problems. Now, several people have very diligently watching my videos noticed that a while back I carried out my first cross between 2 different species orchids in this greenhouse, and that was Polystachya bella and Polystachya pubescens. And I wasn't sure at the time whether the seed would set and the pod would develop, but it did. And when it was ripe and just beginning to sort of, you can tell when it's ready to just sort of start opening up and scattering its seeds, I sent it off to a lab, Orchid Alchemy, here in this country, England, to grow on in his lab to produce seedlings. And this spring, finally, the flasks were ready, and so I obtained a flask of seedlings of my orchid cross. I shared those with my friend Hugh, who's more experienced at crossing orchids and growing seedlings than me, and I took his advice on what to do. And you can see that these are potted in small pots, clear pots, some fine orchid bark on the bottom, and then a bit of sphagnum moss and bark on the top to help retain the moisture. And as you can see, they're beginning to grow really well. You can just about see a nice root growing there. So I'm hoping that in another maybe 2 years I might be able to show you some flowers. Right, well that's what I particularly wanted to show you today. So until the next time, hope to see you in that, and thanks for watching.